Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that we ran on. And, top of the news this week still is Palestine. Right now, Israel's bombing the hell out of Gaza City. Gazans are still starving. The U.S.-backed Israeli genocide of the Palestinians continues. As we speak, there have been 150 and counting people arrested in Parliament Square in London, protesting the ban on the Palestine Action Group, which the UK government banned because they'd done property damage to defense assets that were helping to arm Israel. And these people, Palestine Action was banned. So these people under another banner are protesting, in solidarity with Palestine, but also against the repression by the UK government. It's just astounding that in the UK, as well as the US and some other Western countries, talking about the genocide in Palestine is still seen as somehow supporting terrorism, which they equate with Palestinians. A lot of terrorists are the Israelis backed by the U.S. killing all these people in Gaza. It's distressing. What's in the air now, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, is UN authorization of a military intervention to stop the genocide. There's a group called Protect Palestine. We'll put their link in the chat that I talked about probably 2 weeks ago because I had a guest last week. That is proposing that there be a UN General Assembly uniting for peace resolution to authorize a protection force to go in and protect the Palestinians in Palestine. And so anyway, they put that out there. And I put that to the Green Party National Committee list. I got pushback from the pacifists, but I guess it depends on who delivers the message, because there's another group called Lifeline for Palestine, which is based here. Protect Palestine is based in the UK, and Lifeline for Palestine, we'll put their link in as well. It's also calling for a UN General Assembly uniting for peace resolution to send in a protection force and other measures like taking away Israel's credentials in the General Assembly, arms embargo of Israel, and so forth. And they had a webinar yesterday, and they have one tomorrow at 4 o'clock Eastern time. I attended the one yesterday. I won't be able to make the one tomorrow because I got another commitment. And Jill Stein is really playing a leading role in this Lifeline for Palestine, which I commend her for, despite my differences on Ukraine. And when the Lifeline for Palestine seminars were posted on the National Committee list, it didn't get the pushback from the pacifists and the usual few obsessive anti-Ukraine partisans. And in fact, the Green Party Steering Committee endorsed these Lifeline for Palestine seminars. The vote there was divided. It was 5 yes, 1 no, and 1 abstain. And the no and abstention, I think, came from pacifists who oppose military action in every circumstance, even to stop a genocide. So that part of the debate continues. And, as I've said, I support the idea. I think it's morally and legally justified to militarily intervene to stop the Israeli genocide. My question is the feasibility of such a military operation. I mean, how is it going to succeed against the nuclear armed fanatics that rule Israel and the US? Which countries would participate? How would they respond to an attack by Israeli forces if they, started to approach Israel? The interesting thing, kind of ironically, yesterday in the discussion on Lifeline for Palestine, there was a lot of talk about, how bad U.S. policy is, how bad Israelis are, and what they're doing to the Palestinians. Not much on the feasibility of the protection force militarily. And it was ironic that it was Medea Benjamin, of all people, who cited Francesca Albanese, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied territories in Palestine, who called for navies of, the Mediterranean countries, as Albanese put it, to undertake this. And, militarily, maybe they could open up Gaza for food, but what about protecting the Palestinians on the West Bank and inside the Green Line? I mean, it's hard to imagine Jordan or Syria allowing a protection force to cross their territory because Israel would declare war on them. Now, maybe tomorrow they will have more discussion of the military angle, but that still remains my question. And I said it's on the international agenda. On August 10th, the representative of the Palestinian state asked the UN Security Council to intervene against the genocide militarily. And I'll quote what was said: "Council must act under Chapter 7, that's of the UN Charter, to deprive Israel of the means to pursue this war of atrocities, to hold it accountable for its crimes, and to send an immediate international protection force to save the Palestinian people from certain death." So that was put before the Security Council on August 10th. Of course, the US would veto any such action by the Security Council. So now the demand is that the UN General Assembly act under the Uniting for Peace resolution, which requires a 2/3 vote and overrules whatever the Security Council does. That's been on the, legal precedents of the UN since 1950. And it was used in 1956 to stop the invasion of Egypt, to grab the Suez Canal by Israel, Britain, and France. And it worked. I mean, the US and the USSR joined forces to support that Uniting for Peace resolution, and Israel and France and the UK backed away. So the UN General Assembly is going to reconvene next Tuesday, September 9th. And the UN General Assembly a year ago set a deadline of September 18th this year to conform to the July 19th, 2024 ruling of the International Court of Justice that the Israel occupation is unlawful and must end, quote, as rapidly as possible. Obviously, that has not happened. So now it's up to the General Assembly to follow up on that. And the deadline was set last September. It's now September 18th is a year. So that is seen as a day when this is going to be brought forward. So Protect Palestine and Lifeline for Palestine are demanding a new Uniting for Peace resolution that includes sending a UN protection force to Gaza and the West Bank. There's also a proposal coming out of the UN conference on the, quote, peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution, which was co-hosted by France and Saudi Arabia on behalf of the EU and the Arab League last July. But what they're talking about is a stabilization force after there's a ceasefire and the Palestinian Authority has been restored to power in Gaza, which means they're going to do nothing as long as Israel continues this war. So there will be competing proposals before the UN General Assembly. And, what we need to be doing to the extent we can is influencing the General Assembly to go with the kind of Uniting for Peace resolution that would authorize a protection force now and not wait for Israel to basically agree to it. So that's very interesting. I'm still, skeptical about the military feasibility. The other parts of a resolution, Colombia under Gustavo Petro, a left-winger who's president of Colombia, is reportedly preparing a resolution that calls not only for the protection force, but for an arms embargo, BDS, and withdrawing Israel's credentials to the General Assembly. Those are basically the elements of this proposal that both Palestine Protection in the UK and Lifeline for Palestine in the US are proposing. So if you can tomorrow, that 4 o'clock Eastern time webinar is where you can find out more about this. So talking about military action, we saw that the U.S. Struck a boat off the coast of Venezuela. It was the summary execution of 11 people by U.S. Special Forces using a drone. Now, the U.S. said this was, drug smugglers. Okay, well, the standard operating procedure has been that the Coast Guard interdicts boards and, looks for drugs, and if they're there, arrests those responsible. But in this case, I mean, were these Venezuelans, basically who are refugees going to the U.S. or another country? Were they people fishing? We decided without any due process, charges, evidence, a trial, and killed these people. And unfortunately, this may just be the beginning of this kind of action. Marco Rubio was in Ecuador this week and said there'll be more summary executions like this without due process. And of course, is the death penalty really an effective deterrent? State murder is hard to justify morally, and the death penalty is not proven to be a deterrent in this country. Look at the crime rates in states that have the death penalty versus those that don't, and you won't find that the death penalty is a deterrent. And then as the question is, okay, is this a dry run for summary executions on U.S. soil? If they're going to blatantly, violate the law, international law, and actually U.S. law in blowing these 11 people out of the water off the coast of Venezuela, what's going to stop them from doing it in the U.S.? We had this question under Obama, when he had his, what do you call them, Kill Tuesdays, where he picked targets for the U.S. to take out alleged terrorists. It's going to another level under Trump. And, with, the Trump sending U.S. military into cities, you wonder if, the purpose isn't to interfere with the 2026 elections and make it harder for, Democratic cities to vote. There are just a lot of questions here. So this, I think, was a very disturbing development. I mean, mayors in Democratic cities have said they're worried that Trump is going to use military occupations to mess with the 26 elections. And the other thing is, I've been looking for reports as to actually who these 11 people were. The U.S. says they were drug smugglers. Venezuela has said, this was, at first they said it was fake, but then they said it was unjustified. But nobody that I've seen has said, talk to the families of these people that were blown away. So, that to me is a very ominous development this week. And then, turning to the Ukraine situation, I think it's obvious that Trump is totally aligned with Putin on Ukraine. The only thing he can do further to hurt Ukraine is to withdraw intelligence cooperation. We already know that U.S. intelligence is not telling Ukraine where Russian military assets are inside Russia. Apparently, they're still sharing intelligence on Russian military positions inside the Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine. But how long is that going to last? It's pretty clear that Trump wants Ukraine to basically surrender on Russia's terms, as if Russia's going to stop. The proposal is, okay, give Russia the rest of Donetsk Oblast or region or province, which would be turning over 250,000 people to Russian occupation, as well as relinquishing heavily fortified positions in Donetsk, which Russia's been trying for 11 years to break through. And then there'd be a freeze on the rest of the front line. But last week, General Gerasimov, who's the chief of staff of the Russian military, had a map up in a briefing he was giving showing Russian-occupied territories, including the rest of Kherson and Zaporizhia provinces, which they don't control, as well as Mykolaiv and Odessa provinces, which they've never been in. And that may tell us what Russia is really looking for as the next step. There's a big offensive planned in this very area of Donetsk, where these fort-line cities are, and 100,000 Russian troops have amassed there and are getting ready for a big assault. But Ukraine knows they're coming. We'll see what happens. But it seems pretty obvious to me that Trump, he just wants Ukraine. That's why he's angry at Zelensky, because Zelensky stood up to him at that February 28th meeting where Vance and Trump tried to bully him and, just won't go along with surrender. And Trump wants to, get some kind of peace agreement. He doesn't care really what's in it, so he can make his claim for a Nobel Peace Prize, which is absurd. So what I wanted to really call your attention to today, and we'll put some links to this in the chat, a couple of articles. The U.S. is sending Russian exiles, anti-war Russians, who are seeking asylum in the U.S. back to Russia in handcuffs. And Russia's going to imprison them in these labor camps. And it's a terrible injustice. And some of these people may not survive because of it. And actually, this began under Biden because they started deporting people who had crossed, some of them across the Mexican border. It's the only way they could get to the U.S. to seek asylum. But Trump has really escalated it. And so now there's about, I think 50 have been deported and another 80 are about to be deported. These are Russian anti-war exiles, which is just a travesty of justice. What the hell does the Statue of Liberty mean anymore? And then the Ukrainians who are here seeking refuge are next in line. There are about 300,000 of them in the U.S., and they were granted temporary protection under the Biden administration. And the Trump administration is signaling that they're going to withdraw that protection and start sending those Ukrainians back to Ukraine into the middle of a war. The deportation madness continues. We have a factory right near here in Syracuse, a protein bar factory, where ICE raided it, and they separated the Latinos and took 70 of them out of 220 total workforce away to the ICE, gulags. And, the owners, when they heard about it, they tried to get back and see what was going on, and ICE wouldn't even let them into their own factory. You probably heard about the Hyundai factory down in Georgia where 300 people were snatched, in that case, mostly Korean nationals. This is just madness. And, the economy now is going down. And, these deportations are going to hurt it because these people are doing jobs that are needed and many Americans won't do. It's not like we have excess labor for all the things that businesses want to do. Although now that the economy is turning down, the jobs report this week pointed out that for the first time since 2020, there are more people seeking jobs than there are jobs available. And then there's the tariff chaos, which has got investors spooked. They're not investing in, real investments and, plant and equipment and hiring labor. But now the stock market took a hit this week. So the economy is going down. I mean, now is the time when Greens should really step into this vacuum, because the Democrats don't have an economic program under their neoliberal corporate leadership that the working class or really anybody can tell you what it is. There's a vacuum there, and this is a real opportunity for us to fill it. And I'll just wrap up here with some good news. I think the Greens in the United Kingdom are stepping up to fill the vacuum they have, with Labour drifting to the right and the fascist anti-immigrant Reform Party of Nigel Farage is rising. And so what happened this week, earlier this week, Zap Polensky for party leader and Mothin Ali and Rachel Millward for deputy leaders were elected. And Zach won in a landslide. He won 84% to 16% against two sitting Green members of parliament. But he is a passionate speaker, and he has this eco-populist message that features stories that, makes it personal, that people can relate to. And the MPs kind of came across as stuffy politicians. So, the Greens voted the left in. Also, the week before that, Ross Greer and Gillian McKay were elected as leaders of the Scottish Greens, which also turned their party decisively to the left. And I think, Zach getting elected, I met with him for a couple hours when I was over there last December. And, he talked about, the politics within the Green Party. And I think he represents a generational change in the Green Party of England and Wales. What's happened is younger social movement activists have swelled the Green Party, made paid membership to over 68,000. And that's just 8,000, really 8,500 more members over the course of this leadership campaign, which took place over the whole summer. So, think of Greta Thunberg, anti-capitalist, pro-Palestinian, pro-Ukrainian, and a climate campaigner, most famously. That's the kind of person that is coming into the Greens in the UK. So now Polanski and the other new leaders have a complicated political situation to navigate. Labour, which is really roughly equivalent to our Democrats, keeps losing to the right and drifts to the right and trying to capture the middle, and it's just pissing everybody off. And you have a new left party called Your Party at this point, trying to form around Jeremy Corbyn. Most of these people, leadership, are ex-Labour Party members. And then, of course, you got Nigel Farage's far-right Reform Party gaining support, particularly around an anti-immigrant platform. Polanski's reached out to the leaders of this so-called Your Party about a united front and electoral cooperation to avoid splitting the left vote against Labor and Reform. But, that is in the future. I mean, parliamentary elections don't have to be held until April 2029, and Your Party leaders are really focused on that. Polanski and the Greens are really focused on local elections over the next year. And so the Greens have been making great gains at the local level, and that's created a platform for successful runs for the parliament. Polanski said, in these articles, and we got 3 articles that we'll put in the chat about this, that he's aiming for the Greens to increase from their current 4 members, which is an increase from 1 member in the previous election, to 30 members. And, his goal is for the Greens to replace Labour as the major progressive party in the UK. So that should give us encouragement and an example for what we need to be doing in the United States. So I'll stop there and let's have a discussion. Just put your questions and comments in the chat and we'll have a talk. Scout Trooper 164. What can we do to help the next generation? Right now, they're being taught to be complicit, to be an asshole with no empathy, and to teach any differences as something evil. I don't want my kids to be bad. I think a positive example, that to show people that politics isn't just about throwing insults around and basically having this cynical attitude that nothing positive can happen. I mean, the best way to get people to overcome that cynicism is to engage them in a practical struggle that they support. It could be housing, which is an issue everywhere. It could be this, attack on immigrants. It could be climate. It could be healthcare. Whatever it is, the important thing is to get people in motion and in organizations where things are a lot sunnier when you're working together with other people to solve a problem than when you're sitting home, throwing insults out on the internet. So I think organizing is key here, and we have to be positive. And we have a lot negative to say about Trump and the Democrats, but people don't want to join fights. They want to join something that's going to make a difference, that's positive. So I think we should keep that in mind with our organizing. And the key is organizing. There's a lot of internet mobilizations that are sort of one-off, and we don't end up in an organization. We're just clients to or followers of the military industrial or the nonprofit industrial complex, where you get people who are funded by wealthy people, who are staff, who decide how we're going to tackle the problem, and then they tell us what to do over the internet when we had no part in making those decisions. That is disempowering. It's not democratic. And we've got to be a counterexample to that. That's why I think all of us should be really focused on building our local Green parties and in the mass parties locally. The goal should be to win over a majority of the people in any community to our program and to vote for us and to support us in office. So I think that needs to be the focus of organizing. Movements really change attitudes. I mean, one thing that a number of scholars have pointed out is that when the civil rights movement, the Black freedom movement came north and engaged youth, the crime rates went way down. Young people who were alienated and hopeless, had some hope and found other people they could work with together to try to make a positive difference. So I think that's what we need. We need to be organized, get people engaged, and do it with a positive, optimistic outlook that, we know that the majority of people support, the key demands of the Green Party platform. Well, let's organize that majority and take power. Cole McCullen, Howie, I'm in line to get my flu COVID shot. Thank you for being pro-vaccine. When do you think RFK Jr. will be fired? Oh, Jesus. I think Trump just likes the Kennedy name. He likes the attention. I think he thinks it mobilizes a part of his base. I don't know if he's going to get fired. And he might be too much of a negative to the Trump administration. It partly depends on how persistent the Democrats in Congress are in, putting RFK Jr.'s feet to the fire. The flu COVID shot, I mean, I can get the COVID shot because I'm over 65. I'm really sorry that people younger than 65 who can't prove a pre-existing condition are going to have to really fight to get that COVID shot this round. And if you follow the rates of infection and or COVID bacteria or COVID virus in the wastewater, it's been going up the last month. And remember, 1.2 million people died from COVID during the pandemic, most of them before the vaccine was available. This is a serious issue. So I'm about to schedule my flu COVID shot. Doing that with the pharmacy, when you talk to these robots and then you show up at the pharmacy and the robots didn't tell them that had an appointment. It's frustrating, but I'm not going to let that stop me. So yeah, it's amazing how many people have fallen. There's a certain conspiracy mentality, and that's the thinking of people who get sucked in by this, anti-vax narrative, and it's something we got to combat. We got to, we need to tell people they need a concrete analysis of the concrete situation, and not just rely on these, online influencers who often are just flacks or quacks. BD Dimmitt. Maybe Trump will be adopted by a Kennedy and get his name on the center that way. Yeah, I don't think none of the Kennedys like Trump except Bobby Jr. So that's a funny thought, but I'm afraid it's not likely. Scout Trooper 164. People are heavily suspecting Trump is dying because he talks a lot about getting to heaven. He was diagnosed with CVI, which I think the V stands for Venus. I can't say what it is, but yeah, he's got a problem with his veins in his legs. I guess that's why he's getting swollen feet and ankles. Some, like Kulinski of Secular Talk, think he has heart failure. Thoughts? Well, I'm not a doctor, but, just reading the news and what doctors say is, all those are possible. You wonder how a guy that's, borderline obese, and if it's true, he likes to feast on Big Macs and fries. You wonder how he's lasted this long. He doesn't look that healthy, but it's hard to predict. I think of somebody like Churchill, who was a fatty, always smoking cigars and drinking, and he lived into his 90s. So, odds are one thing, but each case is different. So, we got to deal with Trump as long as he's here. And then realize, if Trump goes, we get Vance, who's a lot more energetic, probably smarter, probably more informed, and just as right wing. So, the neo-fascist movement is Trump is a unique figure in that he has personal people that follow him personally. They see him as the hero. And if he goes, some of those people may drop off, but there's still a movement that has deep roots in American history. I mean, these are the remnants of the Confederacy and the resistance to the Civil Rights Movement. The Strom Thurmond Dixiecrat types. They're not as powerful or as big in the whole of American society that they once were, but they are still, maybe 25, 30% of the population. And so we can't underestimate their staying power, particularly under our anti-democratic electoral system, which gives disproportionate power to rural conservative states through the Senate. And now with Trump having been able to appoint so many right-wing Supreme Court justices and judges at other levels of the federal judicial system. And then just the spinelessness of Congress and the Democrats. So, Trump could go and we still will have these same problems. So that goes back to organizing. We got to organize a mass base nationally by building it community by community locally. We got to be organizers. We can't just be observers or, keyboard warriors on the internet. We got to go out and talk to real people, face to face. Chronic venous insufficiency. Thanks, Scout Trooper. That's what CVI means. And with his swollen ankles, that's what the doctors say it is. Vicky Corden, any thoughts about the Epstein files? Well, I'm wondering if how much staying power it has. It's certainly being covered by MSNBC constantly, frequently by CNN. The MAGA community, a lot of people that want to see those files because they've been counting that it revealing, a bunch of rich people, probably a lot of Democrats, maybe some Republicans who are, part of Epstein's sexual crimes or those crimes he set up. And I wonder how much staying power it has. I mean, Trump has been sort of a Teflon kind of guy, but this one is sticking to him, like what's the analogy? This one seems to be sticking with him longer than most things. Usually he's able to get one scandal off the front pages by starting another or doing something controversial, like, saying we're going to call the Department of Defense the Department of War, which given our policies is probably more honest. But, I like Department of Defense is reflecting our values better. But so he does stuff like that to just try to divert people away. But the Epstein files have been pretty persistent. So, those are my thoughts. It'll be interesting to see if, there's this bill that Ro Khanna and the Libertarian Republican from Kentucky, whose name's escaping me right now, are sponsoring. And I guess they got to get now a petition. What's it called? A petition. It's a petition to force it to the floor, and they need a majority of members of the House of Representatives, and it needs about half a dozen Republicans. The Democrats will probably sign it. So if they get that and we get a vote, that'll be interesting to see. And the thrust of the bill is to release the Epstein files. So, we'll see. It's interesting how long this has stuck to Trump. And we'll have to see if it really undermines his support. His polls are going down. He's lower than he's ever been, except right after the attack on the Capitol January 6th. And he defended that. So, the economy is going down, his poll numbers are going down, and Epstein may take him down further. We'll have to see. Scout Trooper 164. Howie, I have the feeling that in due time, the economy of America is going to flatline. Aside from the rise of artificial intelligence, people, especially young ones, are struggling to find work because they won't want to be treated like shit, and some requirements are beyond insane. The workplace is essentially a catch-22 dilemma. When you need to get work because you lack the experience to get that work, you can't get the job, not helping the insane 9-to-5 work. Because I'm not a hopeful person, unlike others such as you. What can be done to make hard times easier so that it doesn't feel like there's no chance of getting back despite insane conditions? Well, first of all, I feel you. I mean, the most frustrating periods in my life was when I worked in construction and when there were recessions like 1973 to 1975 or 1989 to 1981 in particular. You want to work, but there's no work and you can't pay your bills and you got to rely on other people for, to keep you afloat. In the second recession, I got injured when I was logging because I couldn't find construction work and got workers' comp, which, helped me through that. But those are the most frustrating times of my life. So I can understand how people feel. My advice would be to get a good union job with some security. Now, those are not easy to get. I finally got one at UPS in the Teamsters Union. I had originally tried to get in 1973, a part-time job at that time. It was loading trucks or unloading trucks, I forget which. Um, and this was in New Hampshire, and it paid $10 an hour. And you convert that, it's something like $50 an hour now. And with, it was about a 3-hour job. I could have lived on that easily, and had the security and, job protection of being in the union. I didn't get that until around 2001, when I finally got in the UPS hub here in Syracuse. But once I had that, man, I had job security. I had a good health care plan and a pension. It was a good pension. I'm living off it now. So, I went to Ivy League school, and you would have think I'd have a job pushing papers. Actually, I went into construction because the professor told us in one class, he said, all you rich guys are going to hire all the smart guys here to write 5-page memos for them. And that's why you do overnighters, write your paper overnight. And I said, man, I don't want to be writing a page. I'm not a rich guy. I'm, maybe not even a smart guy, but I don't want to spend my life writing little memos that only a few people will read. And I like building stuff. So that's why I went into, construction. But I think, those kind of jobs and those, there are union jobs that are white collar jobs too. Teaching is one, nursing is another, that used to be considered sort of professional middle class, but are actually now working class, and they have pretty strong unions. But, there are no guarantees. Look at the federal workers. Those people had, decent pay and benefits and protection as unions, and Trump is, wiping out those unions. And a lot of that's still in court, but, it's, I think I can understand why those federal workers are extremely angry and frustrated, because now they are working without union protection. How do you file a grievance and, have a hope of it being taken care of? And then, you no longer have collective bargaining to set your wages and your benefits. So, that's makes it easy for the federal government to cut your wages, cut your benefits. It's a terrible situation. I mean, that's another place where, we need to organize, and that's in the labor movement. A lot of the unions are very top down. They don't want the members to know what's going on because the members might elect new leadership. And so there's another opportunity, if you're in unions, to organize rank and file caucuses to promote democratization, political education in your local and in the larger union. And that's another area where, we need more organizing. So I think, to get optimistic, get involved in these struggles. I think, when we're fighting along the other side other people, then, it doesn't feel as bad. Andrew Hager, in relation to Xi, Putin, and Kim in alliance with each other, what are your thoughts on this particular turn of events? Me, I fear China will become next in line as a nation in power. Yeah, this is a big issue. And unfortunately, Trump at the level of ideology of how the world system should work is in alliance with Xi, Putin, and Kim. And that ideology is that the big powers should divide the world up amongst them, between them, as spheres of influence, and they might compete in the margins of those spheres. But the smaller countries, whether it's Ukraine or the United Kingdom or the Palestinians, just have to accept what the big powers give to them. Thucydides said a long time ago something like, the powerful will do what they will, and the less powerful or the poor must suffer what they must. And that's the kind of world that they all agree on. And they're in competition with each other for those spheres of influence. But I think you're right. China's got the upper hand in relation to Russia. Russia is selling them fuel, but China's got the industrial base and the wealth to make Russia kind of a vassal state. And same with North Korea. So China is kind of leading uh, that axis. They're also different in that, their foreign policy is, we don't care what you do to your people. We're not going to get involved in that. We're not going to intervene. We just want to do business, which is a world where de facto it supports autocracies and exploitative regimes. Um, Now, there are a lot of people, and some of them on the left, who think, oh, this is the beginning of a multipolar world, which will diminish Western imperialism and be better for the people of the world. But I think what you're seeing is a multi-imperialist world, inter-capitalist, inter-imperialist competition, which historically has led to war. The BRICS, a lot of people talk about, if you really look at what they're doing, these are capitalist powers that want to move up the hierarchy of the capitalist powers of the world. So they're working together, but they have so many contradictions among themselves that they're not. BRICS may not be the best way for them to do that. I think China feels it can do it unilaterally, and Russia feels it can do it with Chinese support. I mean, we're getting more and more reports of how China, despite being publicly neutral, has been providing arms, or components for arms to Ukraine. And, there's reports that Chinese officials are saying, we like the war in Ukraine because it distracts the U.S. from the Indo-Pacific region where we want to expand. So I don't think you can regard any of these powers as benign. And really, we should be aligning with the working classes and the oppressed to overcome this capitalist, imperialist power structure in all these countries, and put forward, basically a socialist international alternative where countries cooperate. And we need to cooperate on disarmament so we don't have a damn nuclear war, which, even though nobody's likely to attack, there's plenty of opportunities for accidents or misunderstandings. And of course, climate change is something that requires cooperation. Now with this deal for the Siberia 2 gas pipeline, which actually China, I saw one of their officials said Russia was premature to announce it. They're still negotiating. China's negotiating for a better deal. But, just think about that. That's a climate bomb for the world. And China may be building more renewable energy power than the rest of the world combined, but they're also still building coal plants, still relying on gas-fired power and energy. And how do we stop that without cooperation and basically revolutions in all these countries? So those are some of my thoughts on that meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization last weekend. Chris Blankenhorn, it's been interesting to see the U.S. media's response to the parade itself. It seems like they are really reacting to it as a big show to make Trump's parade look even more pathetic than it was. Yeah, well, I was in the Marine Corps. I didn't have a lot of experience, but I can tell you, U.S. military scoffs at these stupid parades where these people goose step in front of the leaders. If you saw the U.S. troops, marching in Trump's little parade, they were in time, but they weren't doing all this, saluting type activity, or they were just marching together, and they believe that that is a distraction from being an effective military. So that's one of my reactions to the the Chinese as well as the Russian parade recently. It's it's a Potemkin village of a military when they show off all that marching and parade like stuff, but don't have the military experience, despite it being used for wrong purposes. The U.S. does have combat experience that China really hasn't been in combat since 1979, when Vietnam gave them a bloody nose. So I think the U.S. media is missing the military significance of that parade. And actually, Trump's parade, even though it wasn't what the kind of Trump wanted a parade like you'd get in, China, North Korea, or Russia, and he got a U.S. military parade, which was actually of a military that's much more competent, and the marching is like not a priority for the U.S. military. So that's been my reaction. But Trump wanted a show and he didn't get it. Too bad. But the media's focused on that. I think they're missing the point about, at least on the military side of things. Andrew Hager. But there anything we can do to make Western civilization and pacifism prevail and new leaders adopt a common vision without forcing it on other countries? Well, I would say, and I'm kind of irritated at Ukraine for always saying the West. They want to be like the West. And I think what we should be saying is like democracies. And when people say Western civilization, I think of what Gandhi purportedly once said in answer to the question, what does he think of Western civilization? And he said, it would be a good idea because we don't live up to the ideals in the West of, I guess they come from the Enlightenment, democracy, reason, human rights. And, for peace to prevail, what the U.S. could do under a progressive leadership is provide an example that other countries want to emulate. You can't force democracy's own country. I mean, the neocons around Bush thought they could do it in Iraq, or at least they said they thought. I mean, what they did in Iraq was basically privatize the whole economy and assume the market would solve all the problems. And, the democracy that Iraq finally did, struggle to build, it's still got problems, but that came more from the Iraqis themselves than from, the U.S. intervention. And we have to go back to 1953. Iraq had a democratic sensibility and a democratically elected leader, Mossadegh, and the CIA and MI5 in the UK worked together to overthrow him because he nationalized the oil industry. So I think the way to spread democracy and peace is to, what we can do is get our government to set a good example, which means we need a whole new leadership. And the Democrats won't do it. Obviously, the Trump Republicans won't do it. But I think it's something the American people really want. And, as I've argued, there's a progressive majority out there that needs to be organized and can be organized. And that's really what the mission of the Green Party should be. B.D. Dimmitt, my recollection is that during Trump's first term, there were a series of nations that he suggested we could go to war with, seemingly because he believed we could win. I believe he said North Korea would be a good war for us. He was dissuaded then, but seems bent on having war president in his resume when he leaves office. Yeah, I think that's right. And, what do they call them? The saner heads or the adults in the room around Trump in the first term who were, pretty mainstream, usually Republican, military industrial leaders, but they weren't crazy like Trump or irrational or ignorant. And, they knew that, wars are not, usually don't turn out the way you plan them to be, like Putin found out in Ukraine. So, they held him back then. Now, I think he's looking for, uh, uh, opponents that can't really fight back, like, drug cartels. And he's not going to get rid of the drug cartels, but he's going to blow up, a bunch of boats or, bases in, Ecuador or Mexico, and, say he won the war and say he was a war president. And I think that's probably what we're going to see. But that, as I said, wars, when people plan wars, they don't turn out the way they planned. I think you'll see a big pushback, particularly from Mexico, where the Republican right has long talked about sending military forces in against the drug cartels. Ecuador, I mean, right now it has right-wing leaders. They may, open the door for the U.S. to go in and, kill some people alleged to be, involved in the drug cartels. But it's not going to turn out well if that's what he does. I mean, if he leaves it to a boat or two in the Gulf of Mexico and declares victory, I guess he can say he was a war president. But I think it's going to go further than that, and it's not going to be good for Trump. And then, of course, he's talked about taking back the Panama Canal, going into Greenland, even Canada. So who knows with this guy? He's mercurial and unpredictable, and contradicts himself in the same sentence all the time. Vicky Corden, Trump is dangerous because he wants attention all the time. That is why he wants to invade Greenland, etc. Yeah, I think you're right. He will do almost anything to get attention, and or distract from like the Epstein files. So, yeah, he's definitely dangerous, and I think most leaders in the world regard him as a buffoon, but a dangerous buffoon. And so everybody's got their eye on him, and it's sad to see the European leaders, for example, pander to his ego. But on the other hand, what's the alternative? If they offend him, he might do something really stupid. A. Jones, 35. Burkina Faso just criminalized homosexuality, and reactions among leftists have been mixed. Yeah, Burkina Faso, throughout the French and the Americans, brought in the Wagner Group, now called Africa Corps from Russia. It's now not a private military corporation, but a arm of the Russian armed forces. And actually, the Islamist insurgency has gotten worse. So they've gone from the frying pan into the fire. The leader of Burkina Faso, I've seen quotes of him saying, democracy doesn't work, and he thinks autocracy, more on the model of Russia and China, will work. I don't know what for what, but criminalizing homosexuality is, there's a lot of homophobia in African cultures that he's probably playing to politically, and that's terrible. And the reaction of some leftists to this in Burkina Faso has been uncritical support for a coup, which overthrew a democracy that was very flawed, no doubt, for a military dictatorship. And, does that put you on the left? I think that puts you more in a kind of neocon mentality, except you're supporting the anti-US camp, no matter how oppressive, exploitative, and even imperialist states in that camp are. That, to me, is not a left position. It's a reactionary position. Grant Scarborough. Seems like that's more of a side effect of Western colonialism, which we have also seen in Uganda. There's no doubt that Christian fundamentalist missionaries have pushed anti-gay legislation in Uganda. I don't know if they've been to Burkina Faso, and and I don't know the history well enough to know if homophobia was a big thing for Africa before Christian missionaries. Vaguely in the back of my mind, I seem to have read stuff that said it was not, that this was something the Western colonizers brought with them. So that's an interesting question that I would need to look into a little more. But I know in Uganda, they're U.S. based Christian fundamentalist pastors who have been all over Uganda pushing this homophobic legislation. Okay, everybody, I appreciate you being here. It's been another hour. We'll be here next week, same time. I am going to ask a couple people to be guests. They may not be here by next Saturday, but over the next month, I think we should have, 2, 3, or 4. So we'll be talking about a couple on monetary policy, which is a discussion in the Green Party, and a couple on international questions, Ukraine and the BRICS. So I put those feelers out, and we'll see when they happen. And if it's not by next week, next week I'll be here, and we'll talk more about the current situation and what we can do about it. And who was it? Andrew Hager that was not optimistic. I tell him and everybody, get active. You're going to feel better, and you'll be working with other people, and it makes a difference. And, so everybody have a good week and a productive week, and be active.